What's so enjoyable about sitting in such a hot place like a sauna? My mother-in-law always had negative comments for me, my husband, and my father-in-law. The relationship between my mother-in-law and me was frankly not very harmonious. She came up with a malicious prank at the sauna I also use and carried it out. She tried to trap me inside the sauna for an extended period as a mean trick. However, she mistakenly locked someone else inside instead of me. As a result of her actions, a lonely life awaited her. I'm Emma, 35 years old. I live in a two-generation house with my husband who's the same age as me, our 5-year-old son, Mason, and my in-laws. My father-in-law is an executive at a major corporation and has a high income. The two-generation house we live in was built with his financial support. My husband has been serving as the president of a company he co-founded with his college friends. A few years ago, the business stabilized, and it seems they are now planning to expand financially, thanks to both my husband and father-in-law's earnings. Both my mother-in-law and I could focus on household chores as full-time housewives. However, I'm considering working outside once Mason starts elementary school. The reason being the troubles from my mother-in-law, like her nitpicking and dumping annoying tasks on me. For instance, she'd comment on my cleaning. "Emma, are you cleaning the house properly? There's hair scattered here. What are you focusing on? Or are you going shopping now? Could you please buy the items on this list?" Intentionally asking for heavy items. Not just that, she would invade our private space without permission and use my cherished branded bag. When confronted, she'd say, "It's not that expensive of a bag, is it? It's okay to use it. Mine costs over $6,000. Compared to that, it's not a big deal if I use yours without asking," as if it's unreasonable for me to be angry. After my mother-in-law used my bag, I can't bring myself to use it directly. I have to properly clean it before using. If she hadn't taken it without asking, I wouldn't have to go through this trouble. Every time I take care of the bag, I think about this. I'm even considering locking my room to prevent this from happening. Due to such unreasonable actions by my mother-in-law, considering the emotional toll it's taking on me, I started to think that maybe I should reduce my time at home and give up being a full-time housewife. I've already discussed all of my mother-in-law's overbearing behaviors with my husband, and he agrees that I might return to work in the near future. But for now, all I can do is endure. And there's another thing that bothers me about my mother-in-law. She pressures Mason to study excessively. He isn't even in elementary school yet, so we, as parents, don't demand too much study from him. We believe that understanding alphabets and numbers during kindergarten is sufficient. But my mother-in-law says he's 5 years old, so start studying early, and buys him unnecessary workbooks, forcing him to study. Even when I tell her firmly, "We'll decide what's best for Mason. Please don't force him to study," she doesn't listen. Mason has grown to dislike her because she always tells him to study whenever she speaks. When my husband and I are around, he plays in areas where everyone gathers. But when we're not, he tends to play in his room. But it seems she hasn't realized that he dislikes her and continues to behave as usual. Living with my mother-in-law can be stressful. But in the two-generation house my father-in-law built, there's a place that everyone, except for her, really loves: the sauna. My father-in-law has always loved saunas. When building the two-generation house, he decided to install a small one for the family. With the current sauna boom, my husband and I, out of curiosity, tried it and fell in love with saunas. We even visit places with wonderful saunas. Having a sauna at home is truly delightful. However, my mother-in-law says, I don't see the reason to go into such a hot place like a sauna, and doesn't even try to understand the benefits of a sauna. Even so, my father-in-law, husband, and I all enjoy the sauna. Amidst this, due to one of my mother-in-law's actions, a significant incident erupted in our home sauna. Among the family, especially towards me, my mother-in-law's attitude blatantly exposes her unpleasant nature. However, externally she is sociable and has many friends. She occasionally goes on trips with these friends. She hasn't traveled for several years because of the challenging state of the world. But it seems that she's finally planned a day trip next month. Perhaps she's elated about her upcoming trip because, although she usually engages in minimal conversation with me, she unexpectedly initiated a chat. Finally, next month, I'm going on a trip with my friends. That's good to hear. So, where are you headed? Though I wasn't particularly interested in her travel destination, I decided to ask. We decided to stay nearby this time. Since it's been a while for everyone, we're not going too far. We plan to visit Georgia. Since it's spring, we can also go strawberry picking. My mother-in-law loves fruits. Georgia's warm, so that sounds like a good choice. Yes, it's likely to be warm, so I'm wondering what to wear. I'm thinking of buying new clothes to refresh my mood for the trip. Oh, and I'll be buying lots of souvenirs for everyone, so look forward to that. With that, she seemed in high spirits and cheerfully returned to her room. I presume she's going to share a similar story with my husband since she's in such a good mood. Sure enough, as soon as she saw my husband, she began talking about her upcoming trip. At that moment, Mason was beside him. The moment she mentioned strawberry picking, Mason's eyes lit up. After my mother-in-law finished her one-sided travel story and went back to her room looking content, Mason, who isn't fond of her, made sure she was gone and then asked my husband something. Daddy, what's strawberry picking like? Is it fun? I want to eat strawberries too. To Mason's adorable query, my husband responded, "Oh, that's right. Lucy loves strawberries. Let me look it up. If there's a place around here where we can go strawberry picking, maybe we should plan it. Hey, Emma, do you want to join? Of course. You better not be thinking of having fun without me." When I responded jokingly, my husband reacted, Sorry, don't get mad." He added, "I'll find a good place for strawberry picking. Let's definitely go as a group." And so, we decided to take a short trip. My mother-in-law, after learning about the trip, seemed to transform into a completely different person and started treating me warmly. Usually, cleaning the shared spaces was my job. But there were times when she unexpectedly cleaned or prepared breakfast for us. The whole family was surprised by her unexpected actions. Noticing our reactions, she began speaking with a laugh. "Oh, don't be so surprised. I have been a housewife for many years. After all, I can manage things. Until now, I refrained from doing things thinking about Emma. See, Emma has gotten good at managing household chores, hasn't she?" My husband and I, while delighted at seeing my mother-in-law in such high spirits about the trip, We're also concerned about what might happen after it's over. Once the trip ends, she might revert to her usual behavior of being a demanding mother-in-law. Given that this trip is after such a long time, I feared that she might become more critical and pressurize us more than usual. The sadness of a fun event ending is something everyone feels. Contemplating how drastic the change in my mother-in-law might be post-trip, the day of our journey finally arrived. My mother-in-law started her preparations early in the morning. On the other hand, as it was our day off, our family woke up a bit later than usual. It seemed she had left before we woke up. I was curious if my father-in-law was awake. But given that my mother-in-law was not around, and it was our day off, we didn't disturb him. The three of us had our breakfast. And today was the day Lucy had been eagerly waiting for the strawberry picking. The reservation for the strawberry picking, unrelated to my mother-in-law's trip, coincidentally happened to be on this day. We left the house at 10 a.m., but we didn't see my father-in-law. If we had paid attention to him at that time, perhaps something terrible wouldn't have happened. According to my husband's research, there was a strawberry farm relatively close by, and we decided to go there. Mason was amazed by the vast amount of strawberries. "Wow, it's all you can eat," he exclaimed as he ran around the farm, continuously munching on delicious strawberries he found. Watching the joyful Mason, I felt that planning this little trip was a good idea. After eating a lot of strawberries, Mason expressed, "I want Grandpa to taste these too." Hence, we decided to buy some as souvenirs. We thought my mother-in-law might do the same. But since Mason loves strawberries so much, having more wouldn't hurt. Usually, Mason is content with strawberries in a pack. But being surrounded by them and experiencing strawberry picking for the first time, he seemed incredibly satisfied. After leaving the dreamlike strawberry farm, we made a stop at a nearby shopping mall, shopped together, and decided to have lunch a bit after noon. We enjoyed the mall until the late afternoon before heading to the nearest train station. Given that it was a holiday evening, the station wasn't too crowded. That's when we noticed someone carrying many things approaching us from a distance. As the person drew closer, we recognized it was my distressed mother-in-law. "Wait, were you guys out?" she asked in a panic. "Duh, what's wrong? We just went strawberry picking and hung out at the shopping mall. And had lunch? That's all." "What about your father? We didn't see Dad before leaving. Since it's a day off, we thought it's better to let him rest, so we just went out." As she listened, my mother-in-law's face grew paler. "Did someone use the sauna this morning? What was she talking about? We're fans of saunas, but we certainly wouldn't use one on a morning we've planned an outing." After conveying this, my mother-in-law, in a rush, dropped all the bags she was carrying and hurriedly headed to our Uber. Puzzled, we picked up the dropped bags and followed her. Due to the large amount of luggage, we couldn't fit in a single Uber. So, my mother-in-law and my husband took the first Uber, while Mason and I got into the second one, and we all headed home. Inside the Uber, my mother-in-law, looking as pale as ever, began to recount the morning's events. "When I woke up this morning and peeked into the sauna, I thought someone was inside, given how early it was. I assumed it was probably Emma before she prepared breakfast. So, just for fun, I made a little tweak to ensure that the person inside couldn't come out. though I was able to understand most of what she said. Her voice grew faint towards the end, making it hard to catch everything. My husband pressed her. "Speak clearly. What are you saying? You see, it was just a little prank. Emma, you always argue with me. So, I thought I'd teach you a lesson. I figured you'd probably be all dried up by the time I returned from my trip. I assumed someone in the family would notice and help out eventually." Wait a minute. Does that mean you might have accidentally locked up Dad? Thinking it was Emma in the sauna. That's what I've been fearing. Understanding why my mother-in-law was so pale and panicked, we soon arrived at our home. Since John had kept me on the phone, I was aware of the situation. By the time my husband and I reached home, my husband was trying his best to rescue his father. I immediately called for an ambulance. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law couldn't do anything to help. She just stood there frozen in place. As expected, my father-in-law was unconscious. Considering he was trapped in such a hot environment without any drink for several hours, it was heart-wrenching. Before the ambulance arrived, we tried cooling him down using cold packs from the freezer. Finally, the ambulance got there. My husband accompanied his father in the ambulance to the hospital. We decided to wait for his call to determine which hospital to go to. In the meantime, I confronted my mother-in-law. "Mother-in-law, do you even realize how dangerous it is to trap someone in a sauna for such a long time? Did you see his condition? Do you grasp the severity of what you've done?" I was fuming, and my voice grew harsh. The fact that I was the intended target made me shiver with fear. She looked down, silent, seemingly unable to find the words. Just then, a call came from my husband. My father-in-law had been taken to a nearby general hospital. We quickly got into our car and headed for the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors were probably shocked by the fact that my father-in-law had been locked in the sauna. However, his treatment didn't conclude quickly, and nobody came to explain the situation. This suggested that his condition was quite serious. My mother-in-law, perhaps realizing the gravity of what she had done, shrank into her chair, praying for her husband's recovery. If he were to pass away, my mother-in-law could face legal consequences. In fact, we were hoping for that. As hours passed, finally, a doctor came to give an update. He was severely dehydrated, but he's showing signs of improvement now. However, when he was brought in, he was in critical condition. We don't have the right to ask why he was locked in the sauna. But please ensure such incidents don't occur again. Though relieved to hear about his progress, the doctor's words were a bitter pill for my mother-in-law. Even with signs of recovery, he wasn't likely to regain consciousness immediately. Since it was getting late, Mason and I decided to head home. Mason was exhausted from a full day of playing and seemed ready to fall asleep. In the end, my mother-in-law and my husband stayed at the hospital. And I heard that my father-in-law didn't wake up that day. The next morning, after sending Mason to kindergarten, I headed to the hospital. However, my father-in-law still hadn't regained consciousness. My mother-in-law looked visibly exhausted. Despite my husband suggesting she rest at home, she shook her head in refusal. By the afternoon, my father-in-law finally opened his eyes. We immediately informed the nurse. My mother-in-law, in tears, clung to her husband, expressing her relief. After a while, doctors and nurses gathered for an examination. We waited outside the room for some time. After the examination, the doctors left the room, and my husband was called into a separate room. Is this a hospital? Yes, it's a hospital. I'm so sorry, dear. If I hadn't played that foolish prank, none of this would have happened. It seemed that his memory of being trapped in the sauna was hazy. At that moment, my husband returned from his talk with the doctor. My father-in-law began to ask my husband questions. What's the date today? Why am I in a hospital? I remember going into a sauna. But what happened after that? My husband slowly and patiently answered each of his queries. After getting all his questions answered, my father-in-law peacefully fell asleep again. By the next morning, he woke up normally and even managed to eat his breakfast. His consciousness was clear, and the doctors informed that if no abnormalities were found, he would be discharged. Surprisingly, despite having suffered severe dehydration, all his test results came back normal, and he was allowed to leave the hospital. As soon as my father-in-law got home in my car, he immediately confronted my mother-in-law. Tell me the truth, or we're getting a divorce. I tampered with the sauna door to get back at Emma, to teach Emma a lesson. That's it. I'm done. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house. Why? I told you the truth. Why do we have to divorce? It's not about that. I can't live with someone who has such a twisted nature. Sign the papers and get out. It was rare to see my father-in-law, who's always calm, this upset. It was clear he had made up his mind about cutting ties with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law kept saying she wouldn't divorce, but my father-in-law was resolute. In an act of final kindness, he arranged an apartment for my mother-in-law, sent all her belongings there, and covered the moving costs. He had truly chosen to cast her out. Even after they began living separately, my mother-in-law remained opposed to the divorce. Both hired lawyers and a legal battle ensued. Due to my mother-in-law's reckless lifestyle, the divorce was finalized. For the first time in her life, she began living alone. She tried to lean on my husband and me, but we never offered assistance. On the other hand, with her gone, the stress in our household significantly reduced. Not only I, but even our child, Mason, seemed happier, playing joyfully in the room every day. I hope that in this house, including my father-in-law, the four of us can continue living a stress-free and happy life.